We've got a good chance for discussions now, and we've got helpers with microphones. Now, please, if you'd like to ask a question, please look for the microphone holder there, because this is being recorded for posterity. So we're very keen to make sure we get the questions. So I'll take that first question there. Thank you very much.
Security is very important on the net. The British government and the American government have this idea that they can put a back door into people's computers, indirectly, whatever, that they can check there's no terrorist activity. In practice, if they can get in, so can everybody else. This undermines security. By undermining security in this way, it works against the ideas of democracy. It means that commercial activity can be detected and transmitted to Americans and be used for corporate interests. This has already been done in the past using the echelon. Not to mention people's privacy. If you want to talk about some private matter, then this could, in theory, be picked up and used against you later on. You've got a vast distributed network of stuff doing that I went into is probably too technical.
Yes, thank you. Any takers on this question about how technology has given all sorts of tools that can potentially used in ways never dreamed of before? Howard.
Thank you. Yeah, there is clearly through, it's just an equivalence of an arms race in terms of the tools and techniques that are available to governments or organisations, entities, to be able to carry a harmful effect. Yes, governments then will seek to try and protect citizens against that, and they will, using their authorities, and the British and American governments, I imagine, are no different than here in New Zealand, where our government would do that through an exercise of their lawful power and control the agencies that they instruct to do that. But it is no doubt that it is a competition, it's a continuing competition, and it will continue to occur.
Thanks.
Thank you. Yeah, thanks for the question. I mean, I really appreciate it, because I think it's something that governments, civil society, academics, law enforcement struggle with, is what does security mean? What makes governments feel more secure does not always make citizens feel more secure. But sometimes it does make citizens actually feel more secure, particularly if you look at events happening in places like Tunisia or in Pakistan and other places. The public acceptance of security measures by government is increasing exponentially in proportion to the threat that they're under. So I think there are some interesting issues around how you balance and in what times and in what processes. I suppose the thing that I found interesting also is how freely people give away information all the time. And in fact, I worry more about the security threats from corporates and from information that people freely share over the internet by not using HTTPS or not understanding really basic ways to be secure online. Probably far more than I worry about the threats from surveillance itself.
Yeah. One thing I would just add, we talk about government's behaviour in terms of using their agencies using surveillance tools and so forth. There's a thing called, and you guys might be familiar with this, a game theory, that if you know what someone's trying to achieve and what's the opportunity in front of them, you can accurately predict what they will do next. So, given the opportunity that the internet provided to these agencies and the powers that they currently had, their behaviour since then has been actually quite predictable. If I was in their position, given what I was trying to achieve, I would do those things as well. So to stop them, you've got a variety of options. One of which is oversight and slightly changing, tweaking their rules, and telling them that's actually not quite what we expect from you, and so forth. Or you've got sort of technical workarounds, and we now Gmail users now avoid NSA surveillance by virtue of the encryption built into Gmail. So I think the key thing is just accepting that that opportunity is going to be there. They're going to continue to try to build tools to surveil people because that's their job, and we're going to continue to say, well, we'll try to counterbalance that in the same way that societies have always tried to counterbalance those things.
Thank you. Could I just have the microphone over here, please, because we've got some questions. Oh, thank you. Via Twitter. Thank you.
Okay, so the question is the level of oversight from the Inspector General's office actually enough? And is it well known enough? And I think it might be helpful if one of you explains what the Inspector General's office actually does.
The Inspector General's, their office has been, as I mentioned, substantially increased in both power and capability since the 2013 legislative changes. In the past, there was a complaint-based system. If someone had a problem with one of the security agencies, they could write to the Inspector General. A bit of a self-defeating exercise, really, in some respects, because if they're secret organisations, then the means of actually constructing a complaint is quite difficult. If the Inspector General is limited to dealing with complaints, it's sort of the legs of that particular power run out fairly quickly. I think the most significant change was to authorise the Inspector General to take own motion reviews and to ensure that they have complete, full, comprehensive access to anything that the security agencies do and any system that they've got. This is a group of, there's Cheryl Gwynn, former Deputy Solicitor General, is the Inspector General. She has a deputy, a statutory deputy. There are investigators. She also has a panel of 2 eminent New Zealanders who are there to help advise and support the Inspector General in terms of the work that she does. The office has been functioning under this new law for a short time, but already it's had a significant impact on the agencies. And in terms of responding to the inquiries of the Inspector General, and of course knowing that it is within the power of the Inspector General not only to report to the Prime Minister, but on occasion to, having regard to the interests of security, to report publicly. So they are completely independent of the agencies as well.
Thanks. Just to add to Howard's point, one of the exercises the Privacy Commission is doing at the moment is a project we're calling Eyes on the Eyes. So the Five Eyes networks, as Howard has mentioned, there are a number of oversight bodies in New Zealand, and they meet. They all have a different role in relation to different parts of our intelligence and security services. So, and they meet quarterly also. The Office of the Ombudsman, our office, the Auditor General, and the Inspector General, Cheryl Gwynn. And it occurred to us, well, what about our counterparts in the other countries where we are also sharing intelligence operations? Because we have some quite good networks there, and would it be useful to reach out to them and create, if you like, some visibility to the network of oversight of these wider groups? So it's part of a transparency project that we're working on to also reflect that. And that's partly because, we've done some survey work, which indicates something like, I think, 50% of New Zealanders think that they're under surveillance, or that law enforcement agencies are carrying out surveillance in relation to them. And while we don't know the exact figures, we know that that's a considerable distance from what we understand the reality to be. And I think it actually is incumbent on us to answer that anxiety and answer that and help reality check as best we can around what we know in terms of those oversight bodies. So yeah, thanks for that question. It was a really great one.
I would like to add a sort of supplementary question, if I may. And of course, this being New Zealand, I only raised this as a hypothetical. These oversight agencies are within government, so how can we be sure they are independent of government?
Well, I think you judge us by the quality of the work that we do, ultimately, and the free and frank advice that we give, and the calibre of the reports that we make. So we'll stand by the character of the actions that we carry out. I mean, I think we've also seen some good support from the courts, from the Law Commission, from those other wider oversight bodies that we have, insofar as issues have been put before the courts. And bearing in mind that they come to them through quite different channels, I think we have seen good clarity in that respect as well. So, yeah, we'll stand by the quality of our actions.
Two points to that. In relation specifically to the Inspector General, the panel are people who are eminent New Zealanders and who would be, I think, regarded as not in government. One's a QC and one's a former head of the Council of Trade Unions. And, I would regard them as being pretty well in the public space. I think also, I'd just like to make the point, ultimately, you have to trust someone. I mean, if you say, well, we're going to publicise everything about what these security agencies do and allow that publication to go to any which part of those agencies, you have actually then defeated the purpose of them. And so in a society like ours, I think we would still judge that there is a need for those organisations and that our political process deals with that question. My point that I was making before is, to the extent that malfeasance or the media or citizens develop a view that these agencies cannot be trusted, then the political process will take over, their permissions will reduce, and not only that, but the organisations will find themselves powerless in their own right.
Thank you. Some more questions. Anything more Twitter-wise? Person in the back there, thank you. And then could we get a second microphone to Gavin there, please, so we can go quickly to the next? Thanks.
I just wanted to follow up. That was actually my question from Twitter, so thank you for answering it. I appreciate it. That one interesting point, and you may have different approaches on this, but I think the implementation of the legislative changes in 2013 was really important, especially in light of some of the stuff that had come up prior. And the role the Inspector General has and oversight over the agencies is really important. I think what's probably missing is a lot of public awareness of even the existence of the Inspector General and the work that she does. I've glanced over some of the outputs that are published on their website, and I've seen some of that work. I think a lot of people in New Zealand don't know that even exists, and I think that some of the cynics out there might be put to rest if there was a little more publicity around the good work that office does to hold those agencies to account.
Well, I'll take the point, and also I did mention the fact that there's a independent inquiry that the legislation requires to be conducted every 5 to 7 years, with the first one commencing before the end of June this year. It has commenced, as I mentioned, Sir Michael Cullen and Dame Patsy Reddy, who I think as part of their process, they've already called for public submissions, and I think through a process of their inquiry that may follow then with tweaks, changes or wholesale change to legislation, there's going to be a public discussion about the agencies and the means of oversight probably over the next 18 months, which will in part serve the purpose that you are seeking.
Thanks, Rod. Can I come to the other end of the spectrum, away from oversight to the public's use of the internet and digital communication? The internet, as far as public use is concerned, is inherently empowering. we can do lots of things with it. So the legislation that we see in relation to public use of the internet tends to be restriction rather than further enhancement or empowerment, because the empowerment's already there. The Harmful Digital Communications Act is an example of that. Now, in many cases, those restrictions are for very good reasons. Cyberbullying is a very good reason to enact a law to limit the ability to do that. But I do wonder whether we get the balance quite right, that in so doing, in preventing harm, because we're dealing with principles that we're only starting to understand, that we don't necessarily get the balance right, and that we're over-restricting the legitimate use of the internet in the hope of stopping something harmful. Now, in the case of the new legislation, for example, I've heard it referred to as a new blasphemy law, that it can be used to hit people who blaspheme against a religion. Alternatively, it's double jeopardy for news media who are already regulated by other means. So you see these laws of unintended consequence because we're not really fully grasping the principles that we're dealing with because they're so new.
I'll pick up on that because there was a couple of things directly about HDC. I can tell you that you couldn't bring a case of blasphemy unless it was brought by God himself, because the person who is targeted needs to bring the case. I'm not ruling it out. Waiting for the call. I take your point. I think the HDC is one of those things where people are more fearful of it than they need to be. The more you know about it, I think the less it will bother you. I think it's some of the ideas that people have raised about what it will impinge on are actually incorrect. It has a very narrow focus and a very high threshold for use. So I'm not too worried about that. But I guess the truth is that the government is investing. Succession of governments invest in giving people more access. Technology naturally gives people more ability. People use that ability. There's an old Maori proverb that says basically, like a dog follows its nose, man will find opportunity, and meaning that if you put an opportunity in front of some people, they'll abuse it. And technology creates all these opportunities, and some people abuse that, and so that's why we end up with the regulation.
Yeah, thanks. And I would just add that I do think the internet is empowering. I think that's why in some of the other charters on internet rights and principles globally, particularly from the Global South, we've seen this emphasis on access and open infrastructure, because many of those countries are still operating under government-owned or privatised systems of infrastructure ownership which do not guarantee freedom and openness and access, and which are still very expensive. So. But at the same time, we also see new forms of rights violations, revenge porn, the publication and distribution of personal, intimate images that is possible in a way that just was never possible before, and the kind of harm that can cause and create in quite lasting ways. And I think the new Act will be, it's a piece of paper. It's given the life and meaning that we give it when we act in accordance with it and how we regulate it. But I think it also demands of us as citizens new forms of behaviour. I saw a really great message, for example, around the couple in Christchurch who were caught in flagrato as they were late one Friday night, seen in a bar across the road. And there was a big debate about those photos, and people saying, why share those? Why are people sharing those images and talking about this? You can talk about the events without necessarily sharing them. And it was quite an interesting thing to watch, self-policing, in terms of people's sense of what was fair and decent, kind of hosing down some of those things. And again, that's a new form of ways in which people are behaving online that we maybe did or didn't see offline. So I think that's this uncharted territory we're in as we go forward.
Some more questions. A gentleman down there, thanks. And shall I take this gentleman first and then you afterwards? Thank you.
Hi, I'd just like to perhaps point towards the fact that most of the time when citizens are acting on the internet, most of us, of course, use websites like Facebook, and we use Gmail, Google, and YouTube. We have all perhaps only skimmed or completely ignored the user's terms and agreements. In a way, those are more or less, I would say, current regulators. Websites can take down, certain things that are posted. Twitter and Facebook information has famously now been used in court in America, and even in New Zealand courts, the police can access phone information. Do you think there's perhaps any need for a Magna Carta or something of that sort to regulate more the terms and conditions that these companies are posing on people who create accounts? Because these accounts are usually what we use to share personal information.
So you're asking if we could have some sort of charter which Facebook and Google and so forth abided by, specifically. There have been some attempts in a way, I guess, to get those groups together to agree to standards. But of course, the ones who tend to agree to the standards are the ones who already meet the standards. So they're the ones you don't really need to, anyway. I don't know. I mean, I think the answer to a lot of this is about the user's relationship with the vendors. So Facebook is a good example of it's a very well-established online business, but there have been times when it's pushed its user base too far, and it's got pushback from the users. We're not happy with this, and they'll be the first ones to know. They know how many times you log on, and they know if you're angry with them. That's instantly something that they know. And so you've seen even Facebook, who you think are not listening to anybody from time to time, you've seen them suddenly respond or pull back from particular initiatives. So I think that's the real power. If all the citizens know what they're doing and they say, well, this is the standard we want to set, then the businesses will have no choice but to follow that standard.
Yeah, I mean, I just add a couple of things. I think Martin's absolutely right. We don't see a lot of people, we didn't in the early days of Facebook see a lot of people claiming that power. I mean, 1 billion users. I mean, in any country where you had 1 billion voters, you're generally running quite extensive, election processes. India, for example. And it was interesting that about 4 years ago, Facebook responded to criticism that there wasn't actually a democratic process for the creation of its terms and conditions, and that there should be some rule-making process that users of Facebook were entitled to and had a chance to influence. And it had an attempt, I think, I can't remember exactly how many people, they had a pool of 20,000 or something that they tried to use to test and see if they could develop some rules. I can't remember precisely what the outcome was, but essentially it was their attempt to respond to this criticism. Another case we've seen is in the Facebook rape campaign that was run again in Southeast Asia, where there was criticisms by some women's rights groups saying, look, Facebook is taking down breastfeeding campaigns and breast cancer campaigns featuring certain images of women's bodies, but there's really horrific content up online around rape and sexual assaults of women, and that content's not being taken down. And really reflecting back to Facebook the inconsistency in its standards. And it was, as Martin said, they had to respond to that. So, yeah, I think there's some agency in there that groups can claim that there's more work that could be done on.
Thanks. I'll just take one last question, please. Thank you.
Hi there. So I'm interested in the market analysis of companies and stuff that currently they're doing interest-based analysis on you. And so currently, say Google has just knowing your interests, say you've searched up something on Google. Where's the line drawn on this, and is there a future for drawing market analysis intelligence gathering by companies?
If you're thinking of starting a business in it, do, because it's big money. People talk about data being the new oil, and I suppose in the online world it is. It's worth money and it drives the systems. I don't. If you're asking, should there be a line set that these businesses, need to tell you if they're reading your, if they're analysing what you're doing online, or if they're applying that information, maybe, but that seems a long way off now. I mean, I've certainly manipulating the Facebook system to see if I can get different ads from it, but it doesn't matter what I put in my preferences; it just keeps sending me dating sites. So either Facebook knows me better than I know me, or its system doesn't really work.
Yeah, I mean, all I can say is I've never yet had a targeted ad that actually was an ad that I wanted. So I don't know if the system's working.
There is the story. It's probably apocryphal, or maybe it's not, about a British MP who wasn't very wise on these things, who was fulminating with his colleagues about how outrageous it was that he kept getting all these ads for S&M clubs, and he didn't understand why. It's not why I'm moving towards Stephen. Before I do close, I wanted to give Stephen the opportunity to give you a little plug for the next 2 nights, because there's still 2 more evenings in the series. Dr. Stephen Winter, thank you very much.
Thanks. All right, that's a surprise, but yes, thank you very much for coming here. It's been a fantastic panel, and perhaps I'll take this opportunity to thank all the panelists and our wonderful chair here for coming along and giving us such a wonderful evening. Would you please come along for our next 2 nights? Tomorrow we'll be talking about refugees and migration, and we've got another great panel. And then on Friday we'll be looking at Magna Carta, visions of rule of law in the future. So thank you again for coming. It's been a really interesting and I think a really useful discussion tonight. Cheers.
So thank you. This is probably redundant, but a very big round of applause, please, for Howard and Joy and Martin. And thank you for your questions too. Thanks.